Welcome to PK's classes. Today we are going to discuss the difference between the emulsion and suspension. So the liquid dosage forms can be either monophasic or biphasic. Solutions are the monophasic because the solute is completely dissolved in the solvent and it looks like one phase. And biphasic, we call it biphasic because two phases are there. Liquid is present in another liquid is dispersed in another liquid. So two immiscible liquids are there and one is dispersed in the other. We call it as emulsion. And when the solid is insoluble in the liquid or the solvent, then we disperse the solid in the liquid medium and we call it as suspension. So emulsion is a biphasic liquid preparation where two immiscible liquids are there and one is dispersed as minute globules in the other. The phase or the liquid which is dispersed as minute globules is called the dispersed phase, and the liquid in which this phase, dispersed phase is dispersed is called the continuous phase or dispersion medium. So it is of two types, W by O water in oil, O by W oil in water. So in case of W by O, water is the dispersed phase and oil is the dispersion medium or continuous phase. In O by W, oil is the dispersed phase and water is the dispersion medium or continuous phase. Similarly, suspension is a liquid dosage form in which finely divided insoluble particles are dispersed in a liquid medium. So when a solid does not dissolve in a liquid, a suspension is formed. And here the insoluble particles are called as the dispersed phase, and the liquid in which the insoluble particles are dispersed is called the continuous phase or dispersion medium. Again, it is of two types, flocculated and deflocculated. In case of flocculated, particles form loose aggregates and on sedimentation they can be easily redispersed, and here the sedimentation is rapid, sediment rapidly formed and easy to redispersed. Whereas in case of deflocculated or non-flocculated, particles exist as separate entities and sediment slowly formed but difficult to redisperse. So you can see a picture. You can see here flocculated, there is loose aggregates or flocks and we call it as flocculated. So it is easy to redispersed. So you can see, you might have seen the mud water. If we keep it for some time, then the mud will settle down and we call it as the sediment. And similarly, in case of pharmaceutical dosage forms, if the sediment consists of loose aggregates or flocks, it is flocculated and it is easy to redisperse. On shaking, it will again be formed. But in case of the deflocculated ones, they occur as separate entities and they form the cake, which is difficult to redisperse. So now let us differentiate between the emulsion and suspension. Emulsion, one immiscible liquid is dispersed in another liquid, whereas suspension, insoluble solid is dispersed in a liquid. The dispersed phase in case of emulsion is the immiscible liquid as minute globules. They are dispersed, and in suspension the dispersed phase is insoluble solid. The dispersion medium or continuous phase is the other liquid, other immiscible liquid in case of emulsion, whereas the dispersion medium or continuous phase is the liquid in which the solid, insoluble solid is dispersed. Dispersed particles do not settle on standing in case of emulsion, whereas dispersed particles settle on standing and we call it as sedimentation, as already have discussed. Dispersed particle size range is 1 to 1000 nanometer, and dispersed particle size is more than 1000 nanometer in case of suspension. In case of emulsion, it is 1 to 1000 nanometer. So you can see the picture here, it is monophasic, solution is monophasic. You can see only one phase here, whereas the two phases are seen in case of suspension and emulsion, so we call it as biphasic. And in case of suspension, you can see the sedimentation, if you keep it for some time, the solid particles will settle down or precipitate, and we call this as the sediment. Whereas this is an example of O by W emulsion, where oil is floating in the water. Then the dispersed particles are not visible through naked eye in case of emulsion. Once it is dispersed, we can see. So this is emulsion, and you can see the dispersed phase is not visible to the naked eye. And this is the case of suspension, and we can see here the dispersed phase is visible to the naked eye. These are some of the suspensions. Then the emulsion cannot be separated by filtration, whereas suspension can be separated by filtration. We need emulsifying agents to prepare emulsions, whereas we need suspending agents to prepare suspension. Some of the examples of emulsifying agents are span, twin. Span 20 is sorbitan laurate, span 60 is sorbitan stearate, twin 20 is polysorbate 20, twin 80 is polysorbate 80. Then sodium lauryl sulfate, triethanol amine oleate. These are some of the examples of emulsifying agents. Methyl cellulose, hydroxymethyl cellulose, hydroxyethyl cellulose, microcrystalline cellulose. These are some of the examples of suspending agents. Gum acacia and gum tragacanth can act as both suspending agent as well as emulsifying agents. Both emulsion and suspension should not be stored by freezing, because freezing leads to cracking, that is separation of the dispersed phase and continuous phase into two layers in case of emulsion, and freezing leads to aggregation in case of suspension. So there are two types of emulsion, W by O, water in oil, O by W, oil in water. Whereas there are two types of suspension, flocculated and deflocculated. As already we have discussed these things. Then there are several tests, mainly three types of tests: conductivity test, dissolubility test, and dilution test, to identify the type of emulsion, whereas no such test is available to identify the type of suspension. So already we have discussed this one. Flocculated suspension, loose aggregates; deflocculated suspension, the cake is formed, so not easy to redisperse. And suspension usually settle down, the insoluble solid settle down and form the sediment. And let us see some of the dosage forms available in the market. So these are some of the suspensions, and these are some of the suspensions, and this is the phase emulsion. And you can see so this is one example of oil in water emulsion, where oil is, you can see, dispersed inside the water. Oil is dispersed in the water. And this is a silicone emulsion used in rubber industry, and all the paints we use are also examples of emulsions. This is emulsion orange, And in our household we use milk, butter, mayonnaise, moisturizer. These are also examples of emulsions. So this is all about the difference between emulsion and suspension. Thank you.